You're listening to People Are Animals Too, Darn It, with your host, Mandy Evans, Executive Director of Panhandle Animal Shelter.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of People Are Animals Too, Darn It. Today, I have with me Dr. Karsten with UC Davis and James Pumphrey from Animal Care of Davis County in Utah. Welcome.
Wow.
Thank you.
So today we are going to talk a little bit about culture, and just so we kind of set the time frame, we are we're in the middle of the pandemic, though I feel uncomfortable saying middle because we have absolutely no idea how long this is going to last. So this could be the beginning. We don't know. But what we're seeing as a trend in animal welfare, and it's really exciting, is a lot of national calls are happening. There are a lot of discussions around changes in animal welfare that we want to see. And one of the things that I find is that sometimes I'm saying, I think this is in general, but just in animal welfare, is that we look at things like right in front of us. And we don't necessarily dive really far in to figure out like root causes and how we can really make sustainable change. And we've heard a lot about not cultural changes, but changes in the way that we operate. And they've all been discussed in programmatic terms. And so I'm hoping that today we can talk about really the work that is being done in animal welfare already, that this is not new concepts that are being considered, and how we can dive a little deeper into it to really set this change that we want to see in animal welfare moving forward. So that'll be our kickoff. So who wants to talk first?
I think that what I've learned about this, and I think you said it very well, is like, we are dealing with the most immediate. During this time, I've been able to really focus on staff training and giving them the skills that they really need to succeed in their roles, and also being able to schedule our services. And I think those two things we neglect so much, but scheduling services allows us to set our teams up for success. It allows them to provide the best level of care to animals and best level of care to our community. And then also at the same turn, like training them appropriately. It seems so like clear and evident, but we don't do it. And we have to prioritize those two things. I think that's critical moving forward, and we need to hold on to that.
And
So really quick, what I think that you're saying is that we have been kind of in a reactive model, which this has caused us to think more proactively, which allows us to be more prepared. Okay, Dr. Karsten, sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say, like, so then to take it one step back is that in doing all that, it actually allows you to get to the root of the problem, right? Like the problem, I feel like for so long in animal sheltering, we felt like, the problem that we're trying to solve is like overpopulation or, bad owners or too many animals. Let's say, overpopulation is like, there's just too many animals, not enough homes or not enough people who actually can take care of them. But when you start to do it the other way, when you start to train people and when you start to talk to people, you start to realize that it's not a mismatch of too many animals and not enough people. It's the resources and services mismatch, right? And so when you have the appointments and you have the trained staff, then you can start to actually address the problem, which is people with pets who are potentially struggling or having an issue where we can actually provide service. It's not that there was animals without people who needed us to do something for them.
Right. And our system is not necessarily we have a tremendous amount of people who love animals, and yet most of our systems are not designed to support that loving connection. Even when you look at grieving a pet, someone loses their pet and they apologize to you because they're sad about it. And I'm like, no, you just lost a family member. Like, nothing is really set up in our world to support the idea of the human animal bond. And a lot of the pressure, I feel like, is put on veterinarians who are in this position of having to keep their business running, pay their bills, and also support animals that they went into the business to support, with that really philanthropic like goal of helping animals. And they're the ones that are getting beat up because people can't afford the care. It's just a really unfair system. I don't know how to solve it. I just think that, I think the first step is just shelters being kinder and understanding that the problem is bigger than what we have identified.
It's part of a whole, I don't want to say problem, but it's part of the whole, right? Like, it's not in the silo that we treat it in, right? Many times, the animal is just one part of the equation, right? And also, like, again, speaking to not supporting the human animal bond, we tend to support it punitively.
Oh yeah.
And that's a place too where I think we need to look at, like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Again, it's the solution, but to a potentially misidentified problem.
Right. And I think that goes back to the idea of like the reactive versus proactive. And perhaps that's our way forward if we're to judge every program or every service. Is this a proactive solution or reactive solution? And sometimes we do need that immediate reactive program or service. Sometimes that serves a need. But how do we transcend to move more towards at least an 80-20 approach, that 80% of our resources are being devoted to proactive solutions rather than reactive ones? And then, where's our end user? And I think as shelters, we have two end users. It's the animal, the individual life that we're responsible for, or we're responsible for supporting where they're currently at, and the person that deserves dignity and respect and kindness. I mean, I think that comes with, when we talk about end-of-life care, I talk to my team is like, end-of-life care is an important piece to loving animal care, and that includes the owner. But there is so much judgment around it, and that's probably why we're losing veterinarians to this issue. We have to provide systems and programs that set our staff up to success, including allowing them time to grieve and process.
Right. And we also need to, I just did a presentation at University of Wisconsin, which was really cool because the majority of the potential or up and coming veterinarians were really, they engaged with this idea of open adoptions and being kind to people. And there were a couple people that really, really didn't. And I think that we have to, there has to be more education and understanding on the bigger picture and what the gaps are and where we're missing, because right now the only thing we're doing is looking at people and shaming them. So I think that if we're really, really going to see systemic change in animal welfare that isn't just this pandemic emotion, a moment, and really see the expansive change that we want to see, is that the culture within that community and that shelter needs to change. And they have to really, we did it at our shelter, and you have to challenge yourself every day. Like, we were on a call and someone said that they needed more animals in the shelter to balance the good. Now, this happens to me a lot because I'll talk about home to home, and people will say, shelter leaders will say, well, we don't want those pets to be on home to home. We want them in the shelter because those are going to be really great pets. And it's like, wait a minute, just stop a second and hear what you just said. You want animals in your shelter? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. But we get caught up in our old ways. It was time right now to really challenge our thinking and how we view ourselves and our role in the community. And until we do that, I don't see the change. Now, I will say this though, the work that's happening is really great. And even shelters, like we have a ton of shelters joining home to home, more so than we've ever had before. And I feel like there is a light at the end of the tunnel, because once people start working with those community members and they hear the positive results and they get the feedback that it's working, I think we'll start to see the change. It's the really judgmental people that will only take one issue that turns them, and then they go and slide backwards.
That's what I try to impress upon the folks that I'm working with, is that that change will come when people experience it, right? And because if you don't experience it, it becomes, it's easier to be judgmental, right? So for example, like when people say like, well, lots of people have experienced an adoption that went well, and like people are really, really happy. So we like to do those because that feels good to us, right? But I think in my experience, because I've had the benefit of experiencing this, is that helping someone keep their pet, someone who as my former self would have said shouldn't have ever had a pet, helping them keep their pet makes me really happy. And so because I got to experience it and I got to work, and now I get to work with people to do, to provide medical care so they can keep their pet, like it's changed me, right? And I can find happiness in that, and it's not depressing. So I think, so it's also the model of the shelter, Yeah. And like, it is hard to work in a place where most animals are broken and they don't have good outcomes. I get that, for sure. But I don't think the solution to that problem is to put other animals in there to dilute it out, right? Like, I think we could find a different solution to that problem, and we could find other ways of the work being rewarding that wouldn't like solve it that way. So that's what I would challenge us. I think we're at a place that we need to challenge ourselves to figure out how to make that model work.
Right.
I mean, I think that, like if we look at adoptions, that is a reactive program. And if we look at keeping animals in their home, I mean, we should look at it the same way that we look at TNR, is like we're creating a vacuum effect, and keep them exactly where they're at. We are not creating a situation where the person is going to just go and get another animal. That's a fact. So support them. And that's the future. I really believe that is the future of animal welfare, is expanded access to veterinary care, expanded access to behavior care, proactive programs that support animals in our community, and empty shelters. Our shelters may encounter animals with more severe injuries and more severe behavior problems, and our live release rates may take a hit because of that. But if our solution is to keep them proactively in their homes, well done us. Well done us.
Yeah, and I'm hoping to see, one of the changes I'm hoping to see is that the data collection. So sorry, because I have like Snyder marks happening in my head that I have to like say, oh, you shouldn't say that, Mandy. So
say it.
You have for years, right? We've been hearing that shelters should be more of a community resource center, right? Like that has been a message for a while now. Mm-hmm. But yet all of our grant applications, shelter animals count, all of the data collection is not asking for the information or putting value in animals not entering shelters. So if as a sector, it is a priority for us to keep animals out of shelters, then we need to be looking at how are we collecting data? Because the way that we're asking for data is telling the shelters what's a priority. And the priority has always been about animals in shelters. And there are great, I think our funding in animal welfare is so great. And we just have a lot of large funders that care. And I think that that is amazing. But some of them, you're like, wait a minute, you're moving us forward, but you're putting all of your funding into foster, which is fine and great, but the shelter that they've already entered the shelter system by that point. So I think need to, as a sector, we need to start challenging our common core beliefs and really asking ourselves, why are we here? Why are we doing this work?
So one thing people have said a lot is like, we need to go back to the old way because like intakes are revenue generating, right? Like if the model is set up such that your budget is determined by the number of animals that enter the shelter, like that's going to be really hard to get out of, right? Because like where is the incentive to not bring animals in if the result of that is a lower budget, when really, like, so exactly to your point about data is that every animal helped, every interaction needs to be captured, because many times not putting them in the shelter does cost more, but maybe upfront, but not in the long run, right? So but it's hard. Like this is something that's been really hard for us to work with, because like people, I'm not an economist, so my budget explanation is very funny, but so many times we put adoption in the revenue column, right? Adoption fees are in the revenue because we see it, right? Like it's a number that we can capture. When really, if you ask me, adoption is merely a negative that should go on the animal care side, right? Like it's money that's applied to it, but it's not revenue generating, because all it does is offset some of the money we've already put in, but we don't have like a nice number of what we've spent, right? Like how do you capture time? How do you, like how much staff time, how much just time in the shelter? Like there's no nice number to attach to that. So like today people were talking, they're like, yeah, but our revenues are down. And I'm like, yeah, but so is your spending. But that's a lot harder for people, to see. So I think, like that's another piece that needs to be looked at, is how can you, like if you are adopting less, you will have less revenue, but I would argue that that's, so what?
Okay, but wait, I just want to share too, because this was something that was on one of the national calls, and people are wondering like, oh my, wait, if we don't take as many animals in, then it's going to, we won't have the revenue. And what we found is that, we manage our intake, we have home to home, and it's hugely successful in our community. Tons of people use it. And yet our adoption revenue is higher than it's ever been before. We have more animals coming into the shelter because we have less animals housed every day. And so because we have less animals housed, we are able to move them through so much faster that it actually has increased our adoption revenue. But getting to like the science and the math of that and saying, is that an anomaly for your community versus other communities? I can't tell you. But I know that our model it's super successful for us. We've helped more animals. Like we went from helping around 1,200 animals a year. And now in my data, I include all our public programs, including our food bank, everything. And we help 9,000 animals a year. And municipal shelters that's really touchy. When I was just talking to my sister who runs a shelter in California, she said that she's been in committee meetings where there have been leaders of municipal shelters who refuse to not change ordinances around stray cats because their funding is based on the number of cats coming in or the number of animals being euthanized. And so he said, my budget, I'm assuming it was a man, I have no idea, it could have been a woman, budget is based on that number. And so just as you were saying, like that's got to change too.
Yeah, I think we have to change. I mean, like, I think it's twofold. We have to change how we talk and what we determine are our metrics as a industry. We have to challenge that. I mean, we set live release rate up as like the end all be all, so we can change it. Like, and I think now's the time. It doesn't mean that we neglect that, but we add additional metrics that are more relevant. We encourage as a best practice for funding to be based on per capita rather than being based on animal intake. It just doesn't make any sense anymore. Maybe it made sense when we didn't have TNR and we didn't have managed emission, but now we have those tools and they're wildly successful. Those are our metrics now. So let's redevelop what success looks like. I think that's very key, and that moves us to that proactive model rather than living in the past of a reactive model, where we're kind of like Oliver Twist. May I have some more, please? Like, let's stop. Operating in that mindset. It's like operating in the same mindset as like, we're going to find a better home for this animal than where it came from. It's so selfish. Yeah. And like, it doesn't see the person and doesn't see the suffering, or it doesn't appreciate that owner that's coming to you that's been dealing with that behavior issue for years and is overwhelmed and coming to you asking for help, and the only option that you're willing to give is signing them over because we are so tied to this title of being open admission, rather than saying we want to be open service. Of course, open admission isn't the only thing that we can offer. We can offer a wide variety of services. In terms of, I think there is some good tools out there to develop the cost per animal. I think that is work that we need to do as an industry. Purdue started it. Purdue University actually has a spreadsheet that you can download on they did it for ag animals and applied it for shelters. We use that currently, and it's a great tool for municipal agencies to be able to demonstrate to our budget committee, hey, this is what the true cost is. And yeah, like, it's not a revenue number. It's more of like a credit back to what we spend. I've experienced exactly the same thing. Less time in the shelter means a greater revenue generate and less cost, less expenditures. When
we're done, will you send me the link to that, and I can include that in the resources for this podcast, so other shelters have opportunity. Yeah,
thanks, James.
That's
Thanks
exciting.
for being with me.
Yeah, I hope it's still live. I definitely have the spreadsheet, so I'll at least send that if I can't find the online link.
I have my CPA. He's brilliant and I love him. And I'm calling him and I'm like, this is my dilemma, and I go through the whole thing, and he created a spreadsheet for me that you can adjust, like, amount for adoption, how much time in the shelter, and then it's primarily for cats. And we added something that at the 10-day mark, every cat at the 10-day mark gets sick and has to be on antibiotics. So the increase for the daily, amount goes up. It was just a really good tool for us to be able to see what it looks like. And yeah, I think somebody needs to kind of convert that into a web tool, or Purdue has done it, and that's great.
Send it to me.
Okay.
And we'll send them both to me, and we'll figure out a way to, because it's a very common question. And it's a hard one to answer, but if you can, the other common question is, well, how much staff do I need? And I was like, well, that depends, It is definitely not, well, we take in this many animals and so you need this many people. It depends what services you offer, and that and who your staff is, right? Like
Yeah.
you can have a pretty mighty staff that spends their time talking with people and helping them and have a very low throughput, you know, but that's not a bad use of time, you know? So it's, that's another calculator we have in a tool that's helpful to shelters, because that's another big question. And talk about budget. I mean, staff salaries, where a lot of our budget goes.
Yeah. And the one thing that we've experienced, I talked to Dr. Pisano a little bit about this, and I'm interested to see how things go, but we're a shelter that holds municipal contracts, and all of our municipal contracts have really, in the past, were based on a certain fee per dog. We don't have any cat ordinances. So then I get a dog in, and then I have to go through all these hoops, and we changed it to say, this is an annual contract. This is what we get paid. But now that the pandemic happened, and the only reason that we really were required as essential business to stay open was for stray intake, and like the money that we are getting for those municipal contracts doesn't come close to the expense of having to keep the shelter open. So I think that in some respects, we have kind of undervalued our service to the community. And as Dr. Pisano would say, you have to be really careful, because you can't expect, you know, municipalities to pay for your advanced behavior team and, you know, all of the things. Like, you have to be able to be reasonable in what you're asking for. But just keeping the lights on and keeping somebody at the desk and people caring for the dogs, I think, is a reasonable thing that is definitely coming to my mind. Like, we need to be doing this differently. And it goes to that same thing about the number of animals being assisted as being the primary function of how we get budget. And also, this is a good story. When I was presenting in Montana, there was somebody that the development team built their entire new shelter off the idea. They built more kennels, and they built it off the idea that they would be able to shelter more. So what ended up happening was they built the new shelter. Their development director is no longer there anymore. Neither is the executive director. And this donor, they feel like, oh my gosh, you know, we promised this to our donors, and we need to live up to it. So what are they doing? Transferring in just to keep animals in kennels so that they can appear to be living up to the promises they made to their donors. And I'm talking to them saying, you can do that, like, super easy. Start like a rehoming program, track all the numbers of the animals you're feeding, all the animals in the community that you're keeping in homes, and you share that number with your donors. Like, not what the number of the animals that actually entered in. That should not matter to anyone at this point.
No, we have to not see an animal entering a shelter as a success. Like, I think so. Like, look at all the animals we helped. Like, this animal came here because they needed help. And it's like, that's actually, you know, no. You know, like, that's not where the success starts. The success starts when they never had to come in the first place, you know? And yeah, that's unfortunately a common metric, is like, you know, like how many, and like people are like, yeah, but adoptions are sexy. Helping an animal stay in a home isn't. And I was like, well, then that's a failure on our part. Like, it is sexy. And there are people that do support that and will give money to support that. And if your donor pool isn't, then you need to broaden your donor pool, because there's plenty of people that find it very rewarding to keep pets where they are, probably because they've helped someone keep a pet where they are.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So
yeah,
I do think, I personally think it's sexy, and I think it can be. And, you know, there's there's so many ways we can make an impact and be amazing in our community that doesn't involve a giant building full of lots of animals.
So how do we do this? So if remembering that we have, shelter leaders, community members listening or watching the podcast, and let's say they completely agree and they're like, oh my gosh, there's these problems, and what do we do, and how do we make this change? So do you guys have any thoughts or ideas of how do we, one thing that's happening right now is this idea that, we're going to test these theories on different programs out in different communities, but realistically, this work has been going on for a long time. And how do we kind of leverage all the work that's been done and that's been successful to help push animal welfare into the direction we want to go?
My thought is in terms of like reterming how we're talking about our services. In human populations, they're currently dealing with homeless populations as coordinated entry systems, and it's a cooperative approach to dealing with homeless populations to prioritize the most urgent while also seeking alternative solutions to the ones that don't need to enter a homeless shelter, or people that we can keep them in their residence without having to become homeless in the first place. So people that are on that verge of potentially becoming homeless. So I think we can borrow heavily from human services. I would also say, like, in terms of how we're compensated, we don't fund public health departments or fire department based on how many public health crises we have or based on how many fires we have. And we don't define a fire department success based on how many fires they have per year. So if it hasn't been working for us for the last 30 to 40 years, perhaps we need to pursue a different way. And I think there are options out there. I love the example of Habitat for Humanity and other nonprofits that really empower people and work with them to see them for all that they are and treat them with dignity and create solutions that are life-changing. And I think we're quite capable of doing that.
And I think we find the bright spots of the people who've been doing it.
Yeah.
Right? Because like you said at the beginning, a lot of these ideas are not new.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one of the theories of change is that it becomes a lot easier when it becomes more, I don't want to say normal, but like when you can see that it's worked somewhere and someone else was the one to stick their neck out, where, it's sort of a positive peer pressure thing, right? Like they say, this was one example that was given in the book Switch, but hotels wanted to get more people to reuse their towels. And so like the sign or the little memo thing in the hotel room was like, join your, counterparts that, 85% of people, reuse their towels, and it's sort of this like, and in doing that, we've saved this much water or whatever. And so, when you can show that people have done it and you can show the successes they've already had, in a community that's similar to theirs, because we get that all the time, like, oh, but that was there. We're different.
Yeah.
Okay, well, newsflash, we're all people and we all struggle with the same things on different levels, but we have, our similarities are much greater than our differences. And so, but finding a community similar to yours, if that makes you feel better, who has tried something different, and that we can highlight that work, be that now that they've tried it now, or that they've been doing it and they're like, yeah, I think can be really powerful in making change not as scary, and seeing that a different culture and a different billing model and a different proactive approach, is the way to go. But it does fascinate me. Like, we have tons of experience to show the other way doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
and I wish
Yeah.
we could look to that, but generally that's not enough.
Right. No.
But I really, you know, there is part of me that hopes that this goes on long enough that we experience enough difference in our work and in our relationships with our communities that change almost becomes inevitable, you know, like because people got a chance to experience having time to have conversations with people and seeing them for all that they are and not just someone having a problem with the pet, right? Seeing their whole self. And that, you know, hopefully this has given people an opportunity to experience something different, and that was strong enough and impactful enough that they don't, but not too long that they can't remember the old way.
Right.
And so that they still, you know, they can see the value in what we're doing and want to stay on this course.
So I had an experience, actually it was the shelter that you referred to me, I think, in the South, and lovely woman, veterinarian, trying to make some real cultural changes in her organization. And the one thing I told her was, and it didn't even occur to me when I went through my cultural change, it was so uncomfortable. It was horrible. I had no idea. And I just had to hold on that I knew that what we were doing was right. And I can't use that as, you know, best advice. But you look for the people who are low-hanging fruit, the people who agree with you, the people who are really buying into this idea of supporting community members as partners, as that they're part of the solution. And then you grow your group from there. That if you start to try to change minds of the people who really aren't, you know, in it, then you're going to have a really, really tough time. So she was going to her board of supervisors, something, and she asked me, like, how do I talk about it? And I said, tell them a story. And it came to me that us as shelter people, I guess, when a shy dog comes into our shelter, and of course there are some shelters that have different models, but if a shy dog comes to our shelter, we're going to all of a sudden go, okay, you know, it's backing up, it's defensive, like trying to bite, like okay, these are all signals that this dog is scared. And we are going to give it time, patience. We're going to put baby food on a spoon and sit in the kennel and try to get it. And it doesn't necessarily come to us that nope, we're not going to take that dog. And I mean, again, like some shelters may feel this way, but we're not going to turn it away. We're not going to all of a sudden try to label it as a bad dog. We're really going to try to put some energy, time, and resources into developing the dog so that it becomes an adoptable dog. If we could, as a sector, change our thought process on how we look at our community in the same way. So when an angry, mad person comes, if we were able to say, what's driving that? Like, is it because I have their dog in impound and they're scared because they don't have the money? Rather than personalizing it like, well, you're just a jerk, you don't even deserve your dog, or taking the words that come out of his mouth as facts, like that, you know, threatening or whatever. If we took the time to nurture that relationship and figure out what is driving that person and how they're feeling, we would be amazing. And those people wouldn't be scared of us anymore. They would not really need our services. And the reason I used this example was that this community doesn't trust their community. Like, they think that they aren't good enough for the pets. And so my point is, unless you spend time nurturing them and providing them with the information and training and whatever that you need, they will never live up to your standards. You have to be able to build them up. And what they were doing is just ignoring them and sending animals on planes to other locations. So it's just a shift in our thinking on, again, we can't be so dedicated to the animal piece and literally poop on all the people in our community like they aren't deserving of our time and energy.
Well, I think you've brought us back like exactly to where we started this conversation. Is like, so what's your culture, right? Like what is the culture within your organization? Because you can have one of judgment and that animals are better with us, and we need to educate people and shame people and use punitive measures because that's what's safest for the animal, right? Like that could certainly be one culture. Or we can create a culture that is, we are here to help people, many of whom are attached to animals. So, and we don't use shame, and we approach it. I learned this on one of your previous podcasts, Overcoming Barriers to Good Communications, is that when we come to our conversations with the intention that we both want the same thing, the person coming to us and us, we want the same thing. We want what's best for the animal and what's best for the person, right? Like that's actually what we want as well. So when we recognize that we're coming at it from our own experiences, but the thing that we want is the same thing. When we find the similarities and what makes us similar and what we agree upon instead of the differences, which is what tends to come initially, right? The anger, I have your dog, you want your dog, but instead if we can say, well, but we both want what's best for the dog, and that's to end up back with you, our conversations will be completely different. Our interactions will be completely different. But that interaction is going to be a direct reflection of the culture that we've decided to cultivate within our organization.
And how the community responds to you.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done it before. I mean, we've done it with open adoptions. We've done it with spay and neuter. We had to change the way we oriented with our community and make it a social norm. I mean, now it's pretty commonplace that shelters practice open adoptions. It's pretty commonplace that your neighbors and your friends have spayed and neutered dogs and cats. I mean, so we need to make, I think, humane capacity and welfare a priority in our field, and keeping animals in their home and make that a social good and a social shift. I think that needs to be our focus 100%.
Yeah. And I think the initial culture of, someone's not good enough and all of that is really based in fear. Almost 100% is based in fear. And we want to move from this fear-based culture over to a culture that's optimistic and really sees the good in people.
We do see a lot of not good things happen to animals. We do.
Yeah.
Like, that is a fair statement. Certainly depending on, what our role is in the community, like that is true. But it's taking that and understanding what it is and the horribleness of it, but that is not everyone, and it's not most people. And to find ways that you and your team gets to also experience all the good that people have with their animals, not in the shelter, right? Like there are so many people in our community that never, ever, 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 ever interact with the shelter. And you forget that when your culture and most of your ongoings are within the shelter. And so always remembering to keep context and to not forget about all the amazing people and animal interactions that happen everywhere, because there's a ton, and we don't a lot of times get to experience them because they don't need us. They're doing just fine on their own, But but when you see the bad, and that's the majority of what you deal with, we have to remind ourselves that yes, because of the position that we have, that is the majority of what we deal with, but that is not the majority of the world of animals. And to just really find ways to bring the positive in, especially as we see less animals in shelters,
Right. It's an empowering view. And we found too at our shelter that the more that we are supportive, there's a lot of narratives that happen that are completely made up. Like, well, I found this dog that was thrown out of the car on the side of the road. And so I went and I picked it up because the owner abandoned it. And then we've gotten really good at asking questions like, oh my gosh, did you see the dog get thrown out of the car? Did you get the license plate? And they're like, we didn't see it. No. It's like, okay, you're literally making something up to make a story really dramatic. And it like, what if it wandered away from home, and then older, the pit bull type breeds and the way that they age and their body structure can look like they're emaciated. And so what we've found is that we've actually gotten a whole lot better at identifying true kind of neglect or abuse versus before when we assumed everything was neglect and abuse. And we've been able to kind of hone in on that. And a lot of it is just recognizing our own thoughts and realizing the stories that might be coming to us are actually completely BS. They're just being made up out of good intention. Like they're creating this story. But it's actually just not it's not factual. And trying to dive into that with the person without shaming them or making them feel weird. You're just asking. We have it with animal control. There was a dog that kept going across the street to the pizza parlor. Hello,
it's a pizza parlor.
I lived across the street from a pizza parlor. I go there too. And this animal control officer, this was it looked as though emaciated a pit bull. And one of our medical team was like, nope, this is just an older kitty. Like this is what they look like. And really judgmental, ready to, throw the book at this person, and found out that the woman was struggling, that she had just had a stroke and it was just her and her dog. And she was doing her best. She lived on her own. She was really struggling to latch her gait because of the way that the stroke affected her motor skills. And so the dog kept going out. And once the animal control officer actually heard the story, because once the animal comes to us, we have some of the authority on it. And we were like, we're not going to withhold this dog from somebody. We want to hear the story. But then she had the opportunity to go out to this woman's house and fix the latch of the gate. And so it's that situation where you take these stories that are being made up and you provide people with the opportunity to lean in and figure it out. And that's when you see those brilliant changes but you kind of need to have 20 of them before you really become a believer.
And you've created trust with your community. You've elevated yourself to being that community resource. I remember very early on in my career, we had this gentleman that came for his dog, and he had just missed the stray period. So technically the dog was legally ours. And we found out, this was back when we did home visits and all those things that I could kick myself for now. But we did those things, and this man kept his dog outside. And I remember doing a home visit and sitting him with his kitchen, and he looked at me and he said, James, I think you're judging me based on how you've been taught to treat animals. And I'm here to tell you that I've been raised and I treat animals the way that my dad did and my granddad did. And I can tell you for sure that I love my animals just as much as you do. Wow. I mean, it just knocked me on my butt, and I had to kind of take stock. And I was like, oh, wait, we're doing open adoptions, but we're not doing the same thing, that same non-judgmental engagement on the admission side and the RTO side and so many other parts of our services. We learned it in open adoptions, but we didn't learn in these areas. And I think that's so key to us.
Well, and how amazing that like that person had the courage, right?
Oh
like
yeah,
be,
well, and a
to
little
be
bit
vulnerable
anger.
and like
I think he was angry because I was in his house. I mean, like, how dare I? Like, look back and I was like, wow, that I was judging him whether I could return his dog to him or not. You know,
but he had every right to say it, but a lot of people don't have the courage.
You don't. Yeah.
Right?
Or the ability to like realize I am hurting right now, I'm angry, and the words that are going to come out of my mouth actually were deep and made sense rather than telling you like where you could go stick it. Like that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, no, he just said like, this is how I feel. But what I can tell you is like, that's pretty powerful.
I think he related to me and spoke to my heart. And I think we were talking about shame a little while ago. I think that's the same thing. He could have easily have shamed me and been angry, but instead he humbled me and softened me. And I think that's what we need to do as an industry. We need to be a little more humble and a little more thoughtful about what our community is going through. Because guess what? It is not easy trying to figure out how to feed your family and then also provide veterinary care to your animal.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what I ask of everyone right now, myself included, is like, this is the time to be humble.
Yeah.
You know, and like, look at what we were doing and look at what we're doing now, and to be able to say, I was getting it wrong, you know? And like, it's just because I didn't know better. I didn't see it the other way. I've never experienced it the other way. You know,
you need your aha. You had your aha moment.
Yeah. And but to be okay with it, right? Like to be okay with your aha moment, taking some, I was wrong.
Yeah. That's Pets
being
for
able
Life.
To be reflective.
Listening to Pets for Life and their stories. That's kind of what my aha moment when we started to make changes. I feel like that was a really long time ago. And then, but like what you were saying, James, that sometimes I'll talk to shelters, even visit shelters where they practice Pets for Life. So really no shaming, so supportive, so wonderful. But the actual shelter teams that are in the shelter aren't holding, like that standard isn't there. So that's how my dog feels about it. So I mean, you know, I know I sometimes when I get worked up, I speak in like extreme language, but I think that what we have right now is it's great. And it's so wonderful to see so many people having these conversations. And I hope that we can together collectively kind of push the industry in the direction that we want to see. I think what we're going to do, and I'll be calling you, Dr. Karsten, to find out like our bright stars and trying to do some podcast interviews with these shelters that are, and really identifying like what is their thing. Like if you want to ask me about our foster program, I'm going to tell you, you know, it's good. But if you want to talk to me about culture and embracing your community, I can really talk to that. So trying to find these shelters that are doing this amazing work. And I don't care if they are multi-million-dollar shelters or if they are the tiniest little shelter, but they're doing it right. I think we should be highlighting those stories as much as possible so that we can influence the change that we want to seek.
Absolutely. Because it's out there. It's definitely out there. And I think we can, speaking of Pets for Life, I think we can learn a lot from them. And I hope that we engage with that philosophy and that program more as we look to how we change the culture and the communication within our organizations.
Yeah, because they do amazing work and they track the data. So they've got amazing data too. James, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think that what we're kind of discussing is the idea of nonviolent communication. I was at a workshop with Kathy Sadeo recently, and she spoke about that. And I think we need to do that within our agencies and within our communities. And more importantly, we need to do that as an industry and really hold each other to account when the communication is violent, and really choose nonviolent communication and teach that as a professional responsibility, as an ethical responsibility.
Yeah. And does that include removing neglected, abandoned, and abused through all of our fundraising activities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a real good focus is on like, how do we support the community and be preventative and reactive? If our focus is on that sector of animals, we're missing a great deal of people that 100% need us.
Yeah, and sharing, I think, positive stories rather than sharing every negative story there is to increase engagement by donors. We send the wrong message. That we not only send the wrong message to our donors that all we do is work with abused, abandoned, and neglected animals, we also send the community the message that if you come to us, I'm going to label you an abuser, a neglector, right? So we've taken all of that out of our communication. Because also, does it really add value to the animal somehow that they're a victim?
Right.
Or is that more about us?
The stories we tell ourselves, I think.
Yeah. So, Dr. Karsten, do you have any final notes?
Oh, goodness. No, just thank you for giving us this platform. I think it's important to have these conversations and to start to identify, what is it that we're trying to do? Because I feel like when we're so busy, we don't have the time to reflect upon that and to really look at what is our purpose? What is our role within the community? And when you figure that out, when you can really start to figure out what the issues are and the role that you play in it, that's when you can start to be proactive. And so, like, if anything can come out of this, that's what I hope, some light can be shed on to help us move forward in a more proactive, effective way.
Yeah, empowerment is, I think, figuring out what role you play, because if it's your fault and it's you that did it, I don't have anything, so I lose all control over my ability to change. And though that is kind of fun, it doesn't empower us to make the change we want, which is kind of neat, because that comes back to the conversation we're having. We're having this conversation because each of us want to play a role in pushing this forward, and we're assuming our own personal role in how to make that happen by even recording the podcast. So I am a big ball of hair right now because of my dogs, but I appreciate you both taking the time. You're listening to People Are Animals Too, darn it. I will attach the spreadsheet or the link to the spreadsheet that James is going to send me. And if you're interested in hearing anything in particular, please send us a message and we'd be happy to do a podcast on it. So thank you, James. Thank you, Dr. Karsten. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
All right.